Hi, I'm Hattie Volker, and in my last vlog, I talked about the three main reasons we procrastinate, the three main reasons we start putting things off. Today, I want to talk about how this becomes a habit in our life and what we do to help perpetuate it, and therefore what we can do to stop it, because it can become chronic and it can become pernicious because of that. It can become really damaging. So to recap the three reasons, the first reason is that the thing we're putting off isn't actually on our priority list. It's either on somebody else's priority list or it's a hangover from a different priority list, one we used to have when we had different priorities, or even one that was put on us as children by our parents or significant adults in our lives. So this one is much easier to shift, and simply asking the question, is it on my priority list and do I want it on my priority list, can sometimes shift it. If that doesn't shift it, then that might imply that it's actually one of the other two reasons that you're not doing it. The other two reasons are, firstly, that you fear that when you do the thing, you won't be any good at it or you won't do it well enough. So fear of failure. And it's so much easier to fail tomorrow or next week, or perhaps when you've lost 6 pounds, or you've bought the new clothes, or the stars are aligned, when things are different. Because fundamentally you fear you're no good, and when you do it, it will prove to everybody you're no good. So that's the second reason. The third reason is self-handicapping, which is when we're putting off preparing for something. Because if we prepare and we're still no good, then that might imply that we're actually no good, which is what we fear. So by not preparing, we always have an excuse and don't have to face up to what we feel is the reality, which is that we're no good. The trouble is, as well as self-handicapping, it's self-sabotaging, because if we don't prepare as well, it's likely we're not going to be as good. Well, it's almost certain we're not going to be as good. So in the last step, I talked about how acknowledging that fear, those fears, and that vulnerability can help you shift how you feel about it and do the thing you've been putting off. Today, I want to look at why this is and why shifting into understanding helps us in a way that what we normally do when we're procrastinating doesn't. In fact, what we normally do when we're procrastinating makes it worse. So when I'm procrastinating and I'm trying to get myself to do something that I've been putting off, I tend to use the words should, must, ought, got, or my particular favourite, need. I call them smog words. So why is it I use those words? Because they're the words that actually most people use either consciously or subconsciously when they're trying to persuade themselves to do something. And we use these words for a reason, because we feel there is some extra pressure to them that will get us to comply and do the thing that we are putting off. So what is that extra pressure all about? To explain this, I'm going to dip into some psychology, transactional analysis. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not. It was first expounded in the 1960s by a man called Eric Berne. There are several elements to it, but today I want to look at an element called the ego states. Now, according to this theory, there are three main ego states. There's parent, adult, and child. The adult state is the state that we probably want to be aiming to be in most of the time. It's proportional, it's rational, it's not unemotional, but the emotion it shows is proportionate to the situation. And it's the state in which we are most aware and most conscious of our thoughts and our feelings, so that the decisions we make from this state are conscious and thought out. Procrastination is not something we do from the adult state, because anything we decide to do or not do from the adult state, we're doing through conscious intention, thoughts and feelings, as opposed to subconscious intentions, thoughts and feelings that might be driving us. Taking a look at the parent state now, the parent state can actually be subdivided into four main subsections, which are critical, structured, nurturing, and smothering. To explain this, I usually talk about a muddy shoes example with my clients. So if my children were to run in through the door with muddy shoes on, the critical parent would say, "Stop, what the hell are you doing? Take your shoes off now." Possibly going into the direct criticism, "You idiot, I mean, you know better than that. I've told you 1,000 times." So I think we've all experienced critical parent. One step along from that on the spectrum is structured parent. And this would be, they run in muddy shoes and we say, "Stop. Okay, shoes off, take them to the utility room and wash them off." So there's still an instruction being issued, but there's no criticism, no direct criticism of the child or the other person. A little bit further along is nurturing. Nurturing would be they run in muddy shoes and you say, "Hold on, okay, can we take your muddy shoes off? Do you need a hand doing that? And then let's take them to the utility room and we can wash them off together." So there's slightly more support in the nurturing parent state. There is help and love and affection, and as I say, more support in general around a nurturing parent. The opposite end of the spectrum to critical parent is smothering parent. When the child comes in muddy shoes and you go, "Oh, stop, let me help you. I'll take those shoes off and I'll take them into the utility room and I'll wash them off." And this actually has the effect of making the child feel like they're not capable because it's always being done for them. So although the smothering parent is looking after the child, the implication is they're doing it because the child's not capable. Now let's take a look at the child. The child can either be free or adapted. And the free child is the child we come into the world as. It's the one that does what it wants because it wants to. It does what's pleasurable because it's pleasurable. And it doesn't think about the outside world. It doesn't think about its impact on the outside world. And it hasn't been impacted by the outside world to change how it feels about things in terms of its intention. So it's a fun child to be in. So it's the child we dance like nobody's watching in, or we laugh and giggle and play. But that child will run straight up the stairs in their muddy shoes to get the toy they want because they're not even thinking. It's not disrespectful. It's not rude. They are simply not thinking about the impact of their muddy shoes on the floor. It's also the child that will eat all the sweets in the bowl, not sharing, and then throw up. So actually, with our children, we do want them to adapt out of free child towards adult, where they're making conscious, sensible, wise decisions in the moment. But we sometimes end up with adapted child. Adapted child is the child that has been affected by the outside world and that wants to influence the outside world positively or negatively. So there are two outcomes for the adapted child. They either are the compliant adapted child or they are the rebellious adapted child. Compliant, exactly what it says on the tin, does what it's told. And it's kind of where we want them to end up, if we're truthful, as parents or teachers. We want compliant children. Definitely in the moment, that's what we want. In reality, what we want is for them to make these wise decisions because they're wise decisions. So to do as they're told, not because they're told, but to actually be able to make that decision for themselves because it's wise. The rebellious child is your typical teenager. You should tidy your room. Why should I? Take your muddy shoes off. No, I don't have to. I'll do it in a minute. So not doing as they're told. The interesting thing about the parent and child ego states is that they are complementary ego states. So if you approach somebody from the parent state, they are likely to respond from the child ego state and vice versa. So if you approach them from the child ego state, the other person is likely to respond from the parent ego state. Now, how does this relate to procrastination? Well, the parent and child ego states are often about power and choice. When we go into parent, we are trying to remove the choice from the other person. We are trying to exert power and control over them to get them to comply. in a sense, we don't trust them to make the wise decision, so we remove their options and we tell them what to do. We don't give them an option to do something different because we're worried they might take that option. And that's where we're trying to control them. And this is what we do when we talk to ourselves when we're about the things we're putting off. We use these words should, must, ought, and got. And these are words of the parent ego state. We're trying to remove the option not to comply from ourselves. We're trying to force ourselves to comply. We're trying to force ourselves into compliant child. The trouble is, what we can end up with is rebellious child from ourselves, i.e. refusal or resistance to comply. Now, the rebellion, even in children age, is often not just about rebellion for rebellion's sake. When we go into parent state to get control over the child, certainly in their adolescent phase, will want to pull back that control because they're practicing being adults and they don't want you to control their lives. So the more you try and control them, the more you go into parent state when it's that form of rebellion, the worse it will get. In the same way, the other reason for rebellion can be fear and worry that they feel about the task. They may be worried about doing their homework. They may be worried about practicing. They may be worried about the thing they are putting off, which is why they're putting it off. They feel vulnerable about it. And again, strong-arming them by going further into parent might make them do it, but they won't do it willingly or comfortably. It, in fact, will make them feel more uncomfortable because they're forced to do something that really scares them. And this is why showing understanding can work. Showing understanding acknowledges that there may be a valid reason why they're finding it hard to do. So instead of it being because they're stupid or lazy or disrespectful, they have a genuine reason why they're resisting doing it. And that treats them more as the adult. And if we treat them more as an adult, then they are more likely to respond in adult and make a wise choice. And then they can decide what they really want, what their ultimate aim is, and try and achieve it. The same for us when we're procrastinating. If we trust ourselves to do what is wise, like with children, we're actually more likely to make a wise choice. And then we make it willingly and do it willingly. Next time, we're going to look at how we can be an adult more often and how we can get to the place where we willingly choose to do the things we are putting off and therefore are more likely to do them. Enjoy the rest of your day.